Welcome. What I'd like to do now is examine the idea of motivation more thoroughly. One of the most important aspects of human behavior movement was the development of motivation theories to help explain why people do things. For example, it helps us understand why some people are satisfied with simply handling day-to-day administrative duties, while others have a clear, coherent vision of the direction of the organization and pursue it over time. Scholars have produced an impressive body of literature and theories that links motivation and human behavior. In this session, I will discuss several widely accepted theories of motivation, as well as ask questions about how we may use them for improving your leadership skills. A central concept in psychology is need. However, it's hard to define and even more difficult to measure. Researchers have discovered that individuals strive to satisfy their needs and seek out organizational environments that enable them to grow physically and psychologically. For example, in situations that are fulfilling, individuals experience contentment and happiness. In these situations, they develop and flourish. In situations that are alienating, individuals experience anger, frustration, fear, depression, and boredom. In these situations, they are psychologically undernourished and don't flourish. Consequently, their work suffers and the organization is less productive. In addition, it's important to note that when dealing with adults, the motivation to achieve will drive learning, and learning may be enhanced when it's directly relevant to their needs. Here is a diagram of how motivation works. Fundamentally, motivation is rooted in individuals striving to meet their needs and is the basis for purposive behavior. Thus, motivating employees is a pivotal concern for administrators. Two concepts are central to the notion of motivation and are often described as the extrinsic-intrinsic debate. These two dimensions have dominated thinking about motivation in organizational behavior since the 1920s. Both extrinsic and intrinsic motivation focus on the individual in the organization. Behavioral psychologists who emphasize external control of the individual proffered some mix of external rewards and punishments to motivate people, often described as the carrot and stick approach. Cognitive and humanist psychologists, on the other hand, argue that internal thoughts and feelings are the primary source of motivation. Again, we use extrinsic and intrinsic motivation to describe opposite ends of the continuum. In reality, motivation may be composed of a mix of the two as it relates to the individual and the organizational context. The basic premise of the argument for extrinsic motivation is grounded in the notion that people avoid pain or punishment and repeat a desired behavior when it's rewarded. The notion that managers can influence worker behavior by manipulating positive reinforcements, the carrot, and negative reinforcers, the stick, has been widely embraced and used in organizations. Examples of external controls may include merit pay plans, demands for accountability, emphasis on formal supervision, annual performance reviews tied to salary and reappointment to position, university faculty and tenure and promotion reviews, up is reward and out is punishment. Managers often use these strategies without regard to whether they are actually motivating people or engender resentment, alienation, and subtle resistance. In addition, the use of external controls may provide insight into how managers negatively view workers. It is something that is done to workers to increase productivity and maintain managerial control. In other words, extrinsic rewards are viewed as ways to manipulate workers and are often associated with top-down structuralist management practices. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, presents a different view of how workers may meet their needs and benefit the organization. Cognitive and humanist psychologists believe that crucial factor in motivating people lies within individuals themselves and are tied to their psychological and physiological development. In other words, the emotional and cognitive capacity of individuals influences their perceptions, attitudes, feelings, and aspirations, which in turn can either motivate them or inhibit behavior. In this regard, motivation is linked to managers and leaders creating the conditions in the organization that support individuals tapping their inner drives, that motivate them to grow and develop. As I mentioned, both extrinsic and intrinsic motivation focus on the individual in an organization. However, understanding organizational behavior also requires us to acknowledge that the person does not act alone. They always act as a member of the group. As we have learned from the Western Electric and bank wiring room studies, we know that groups are dynamic social systems that establish interdependent relationships among people who share norms, values, and beliefs. In other words, culture, as well as the purposes and expectations for behavior. Expectations for behavioral norms are tacitly shared by the group and influence attitudes and beliefs that in many respects define truth and reality. The Western Electric studies demonstrated the power of group norms in motivating people at work. This is a widely accepted concept and has remained a central theme in organizational behavior since the 1930s. Before we move on, I would like to briefly review findings from the Western Electric studies. As we have learned, researchers studied worker behavior at the Hawthorne plant of the Western Electric Company between 1924 and 1934 to determine how much illumination was required to achieve maximum worker output. This approach was based on Taylor's notion of scientific management. Let's look at findings from the lighting research study as they are central to our discussion of motivation. First, there was no relationship between light intensity and worker output. Second, workers were motivated by psychological rather than physiological factors. And third, it demonstrated a relationship between psychological factors and productivity. Findings from the bank wiring room study were also important. First of all, the bank wiring room workers were all women. Researchers implemented different treatments, including breaks, shorter work day and weeks, to determine how to raise worker productivity. They found that productivity increased all year regardless of treatment. Special attention workers received, being in an experimental group, motivated them. They also found that the social group became more cohesive and mature over time. When they worked at their own pace, it was motivating, and workers in the group compensated for those who were slower and dinged those who were too productive. They maintained a highly productive unit, fair pay for a fair day's work, that ensured their jobs and made the company profitable during the 1930s. In other words, quid pro quo. It's important that we move research into practice. Here are some points that may prove useful. Point 1. When workers' needs for affiliation, recognition of competence, and achievement were fulfilled, production rose. Point 2. The relationship between worker motivation and productivity set the stage for the human relations movement and grounded attempts to develop more effective, in other words, productive organizations. Point 3. Human relations theories attempted to explain worker motivation and had implications for administrative behavior, including motivating individuals. It was central to increasing productivity. Group leadership emerged as a new concept and laid the groundwork for site-based management, quality circles, and professional learning communities and other forms of collaborative work. Maslow believed that the driving force that causes individuals to join an organization, stay, and work in it is based on a hierarchy of needs. He developed a general theory that postulated that when lower order needs, basic needs, are satisfied, a higher order of need appears, and that the individual attempts to satisfy it. Only unmet needs, or prepotent needs, motivate people. Also, this principle works in reverse. For example, when an individual has met high order needs and is then faced with loss of lower order needs, they will focus on meeting them. Thus, lower order needs will become prepotent motivators. The next slide depicts Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As you can see, basic physiological needs must be met before other needs become prepotent, including safety and security, social affiliation, esteem, and self-actualization. The genius of Maslow's work is reflected in the simplicity of his general theory of motivation. Lower needs are referred to as deficiency needs. It must be met before individuals strive to meet higher order needs, or growth needs. As the need for growth and self-development expands, individuals actively seek out knowledge, understanding, and situations that meet them. The hierarchy of needs view of motivation envisions the possibility of individuals committing enormous amounts of psychic energy to meeting their needs, which may increase over time. First, by meeting deficiency needs, and then pursuing growth and development needs. To improve schools, leaders should try to enhance workers' motivation by creating environments in which they can grow, develop, and pursue self-actualization. I'd like to note that Maslow's armchair theory makes sense, but it is not empirically grounded. The next slide depicts Porter's hierarchy of needs. His model differs slightly from Maslow's in that he combines safety, security, and physiological needs and adds the category of autonomy. It is equally useful for leaders in understanding motivation. As you can see, Porter begins with security, moves to affiliation, then self-esteem, autonomy, and finally self-actualization. As I mentioned, Lyman Porter adapted Maslow's concept of a hierarchy of needs to work in organizations by adding a new level, autonomy, that refers to individuals' needs to have a voice in decisions that affect him or her, and some latitude in working independently. Sir Giovanni refers to these as operating need levels of teachers. Sir Giovanni found that teachers who had met lower level needs but were generally deficient in esteem and self-actualization differed by age. For example, teachers between the ages of 20 and 24 were most concerned with esteem needs. Teachers between the ages of 25 and 34 were deficient in all growth needs. And teachers ages 45 and above found work highly motivating, or they just expected less. Salaries and benefits are not motivating, but teachers strive to achieve feelings of self-worth, competence, respect, a desire to influence their workplaces, and achieve a sense of accomplishment. School and district leaders can enhance school effectiveness by creating environments that support teachers' efforts to meet their needs. Frederick Herzberg based his two-factor theory of motivation on empirical evidence. Normative views of motivation posit that work satisfaction may be increased if you eliminate sources of dissatisfaction from work. He found that eliminating dissatisfaction may enhance levels of satisfaction, but did not motivate workers. He identified two key factors that are helpful in understanding worker motivation. Maintenance factors reduce dissatisfaction, but they must be in place before workers can be motivated. Extrinsic maintenance factors include reducing class size, creating an amiable work environment, improving salary and fringe benefits, etc. They're not related to motivation. Motivating factors, on the other hand, are intrinsic and are distinctly different from maintenance factors and include achievement, recognition, promotion, personal and professional growth. The next slide depicts Herzberg's two-factor theory and compares it with Porter's model. I would like you to focus on motivating and maintenance factors between these two models. Herzberg's contribution to the field include three ideas for improving practice. Job enrichment. Leaders may redesign work in ways that contribute to motivating individuals, including making work more interesting, professionally challenging, and rewarding. Leaders may also increase autonomy by increasing participation in decisions about how work is done. An important concept that emerged from Herzberg's work focused on expanding personnel administration. It should go beyond an emphasis on maintenance factors to increasing the focus on motivating people. More than 80% of a school district budget concerns salary and benefits. It stands to reason that increasing effectiveness through motivation will be a priority, and the concept of human resource administration may replace more traditional concept of personnel administration. I'd like to review some of the general principles of motivation. Motivating people is complex, and each factor is idiosyncratic to individuals and their organizational environment, and reducing these concepts to simple mechanical processes may prove counterproductive. Rather, a more holistic approach that takes these variables into account may be useful. For example, first, coercive attempts to motivate workers through rewards and sanctions are short-term strategies that will engender alienation and resistance. In other words, doing something to people is not motivation. Individuals are motivated by their own intrinsic needs and external demands, expectations, and environmental conditions. In other words, behavior is a function of personality times environment, as depicted in the next slide. Organizational managers and leaders may create the circumstances that influence the nature and quality of worker motivation. Long-term facilitative approaches that encourage and support members to strive for self-actualization also increase the efficiency of the organization and benefit individuals. And finally, managers and leaders are key actors in creating growth-enhancing environments through nurturing an organization's culture and climate. Now I'd like to have you review some of the key points of motivation. First, discuss motivation theories that reflect the importance of meeting individual needs. Second, to what extent do these theories take into consideration an individual's personality, social group norms, and environmental context? Now I'd like you to apply what you've learned. Use Herzberg's two-factor hygiene theory of motivation as a tool to analyze dissonance between what your organization considers to be motivators and what may actually motivate workers. Finally, and perhaps more important, use what you know in problem solving. Given you are only as good as the people in your organization, develop a plan to motivate workers in your school or district. Critique your plan in terms of the difference between maintenance and motivation, where you may encounter support as well as institutional resistance. Thanks. I hope this review was helpful.